The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis is usually taught like a neat standoff, but the real story is a mess of miscalculations that nearly erased entire cities. It began when US reconnaissance planes spotted Soviet nuclear missiles quietly being installed in Cuba, just miles from American shores. Washington froze because those weapons could hit targets faster than anyone could respond. Behind closed doors, officials argued over everything from airstrikes to full invasion, and each option risked triggering something unstoppable. President Kennedy chose a naval blockade, hoping to pressure the Soviets without lighting the fuse. Soviet ships kept moving anyway, pushing tension past the breaking point as both militaries prepared for the worst. What saved the world was a hidden trade. The US agreed to remove its missiles in Turkey if the Soviets dismantled theirs in Cuba. The public never heard the full deal at the time, but that quiet compromise prevented disaster. It changed diplomacy forever, and the next moment revealed how one sudden act can shake a nation just as violently. JFK's assassination. The assassination of John F. Kennedy remains one of history's most confusing tragedies, because everything about that day feels too chaotic to accept at face value. The motorcade route through Dallas had been announced publicly, security was far looser than expected, and the city was already tense with political hostility. When shots echoed across Dealey Plaza, the country plunged into disbelief almost instantly. Lee Harvey Oswald was blamed within hours, yet details clashed from the beginning, and witnesses described angles and sounds that never fully aligned. The Warren Commission rushed to restore order, insisting Oswald acted alone, but the conclusion only fueled more suspicion. Important documents were sealed, timelines were debated, and recordings raised new questions instead of closing old ones. The uncertainty created a national obsession with what was real and what was hidden. Kennedy's death didn't just remove a leader, it created a void in trust that lingered for decades. That void made the next political scandal far more explosive, because people were no longer willing to accept simple explanations. Watergate. Watergate started as something small, the kind of political stunt that normally gets buried in a footnote. But when investigators looked closer at a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters, odd details started stacking up fast. The burglars had White House connections, mysterious cash flowed through strange channels, and officials kept giving explanations that collapsed under the slightest pressure. As journalists pushed deeper, the truth unraveled. The administration wasn't just hiding involvement, it was actively interfering with the investigation. Secret Oval Office tapes exposed conversations filled with panic, manipulation, and deliberate attempts to block justice. One revelation led to another until the entire operation looked like a blueprint for corruption. Trust in government crumbled as top aides resigned, and prosecutors uncovered layers of political sabotage. When Nixon finally stepped down, it wasn't just the fall of a president, it was a moment that reshaped how Americans viewed power. And the next event showed how fear and paranoia can take over a community even without politics involved. The Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials spiraled out of a small New England town's rising fear, but the speed of the collapse still feels unreal today. It began when several young girls started experiencing strange fits that no one could explain. Instead of searching for medical or environmental causes, leaders instantly blamed hidden evil, and accusations spread like wildfire. Neighbors turned on neighbors, old grudges resurfaced, and personal disputes disguised themselves as divine judgment. Courts accepted dreams, visions, and rumors as evidence, creating an environment where almost anyone could be condemned. Panic grew so strong that logic disappeared, and officials clung to authority even as they lost control. Innocent people were imprisoned, families were destroyed, and the legal system crumbled under pressure it created itself. Only when respected citizens were accused did leaders finally question the madness they had unleashed. The trials ended as quickly as they began, leaving lasting guilt and confusion. They became a warning about how panic can override reason, and the next historical moment proved how a single violent act can ignite something far bigger. Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is often described as the spark that started World War I. But the real sequence is so improbable, it almost sounds invented. The Archduke visited Sarajevo despite warnings about rising tensions, and a young group of conspirators waited along his route. Their initial attempts failed in embarrassing fashion, with bombs tossed too early or landing harmlessly in the street. Believing they had failed, most of the group gave up. But when the Archduke's driver accidentally turned down the wrong street, he stopped right in front of one remaining conspirator. The chance meeting was unbelievably timed, and the shots fired in that moment shattered far more than a single life. Within weeks, alliances activated, countries mobilized, and leaders made decisions they believed would be quick and controlled. Instead, Europe plunged into years of destruction. The world changed because of a random turn. And the next moment showed how something built to divide could collapse just as unexpectedly. The fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall is remembered as a joyful celebration, but behind the scenes it was chaos, confusion, and accidental history. East Germany was struggling under political pressure, economic decline, and growing unrest. Citizens demanded more freedom, and demonstrations filled cities faster than officials could react. Leaders attempted small reforms, hoping to calm frustration, but internal miscommunication set off a chain reaction. During a press briefing, an official incorrectly announced that travel restrictions were ending immediately. The policy was not finalized, not approved, and not intended to take effect that night. But once the statement hit television, thousands rushed to the border. Guards stood confused with no orders to stop them, and the wall, once the symbol of Cold War division, was overwhelmed. Families crossed freely, crowds celebrated, and the world watched a barrier disappear in a single night. The collapse showed how quickly systems can fall apart, and the next effort pushed secrecy and science to a level the world had never seen. The Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project wasn't just a scientific mission. It was a race against fear, secrecy, and uncertainty. The US feared enemy nations were working on nuclear weapons, and that pressure forced scientists into an environment where mistakes could cost the entire world. Entire towns were built in isolation, guarded heavily and filled with workers who never knew the true purpose of their jobs. Inside the laboratories, researchers pushed physics to its edge, debating risks that were barely understood. Experiments failed dramatically, breakthroughs emerged just as suddenly, and the weight of responsibility grew heavier each day. When the first test succeeded, even the scientists were shaken by the power they had created. The end of the war came quickly afterward, but the moral consequences lingered. The world now had a new kind of threat, created through genius and fear at the same time, and the next global competition would push ambition even higher. The space race. The space race began as a battle for national prestige, but it evolved into one of the most daring engineering challenges ever attempted. Early Soviet triumphs rattled the US, creating urgency that transformed NASA from a struggling program into a force determined to reach the moon. Engineers designed rockets taller than office buildings. Astronauts trained through punishing simulations, and failures became painful reminders of the risks. Every launch carried tension, because one mistake could erase years of progress. When Apollo 11 finally lifted off, the world felt the weight of every challenge that came before it. The landing wasn't guaranteed, and even small malfunctions threatened the mission. But the moment Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, the achievement reshaped human possibility. It proved that ambition could reach beyond Earth, and what comes next shows how history can shift again. But first, only cool people are subscribed to this channel, so hit that subscribe button before we go any further. The Great Depression. The Great Depression wasn't just a stock market crash. It was a slow unraveling of confidence, wealth, and stability that hit almost every corner of the country. When markets collapsed in 1929, people assumed the chaos would settle quickly, but banks failed. Investments evaporated, and entire industries collapsed under pressure. Families lost savings overnight, farms dried up, businesses closed, and unemployment exploded. Breadlines stretched around blocks, and fear became part of daily life because no one knew when stability would return. Government leaders argued over how to respond, debating everything from spending programs to strict austerity. Roosevelt's New Deal created jobs, built infrastructure, and restored some hope, but recovery was uneven and filled with setbacks. What made the Depression so devastating was how deeply it reshaped identity, forcing people to reconsider relationships with money, work, and security. The crisis left scars that lasted generations and influenced every major policy that followed. And the next historical moment shows how one unexpected deal shaped the entire map of the United States in a way few people understood at the time. The Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase looked simple on paper, but behind the scenes, it was a gamble filled with uncertainty, secrecy, and unexpected opportunity. The United States wanted access to the Mississippi River for trade, but France controlled the territory and showed no interest in giving it up. Napoleon faced mounting pressure in Europe and needed money quickly. So he shocked American diplomats by offering the entire region for a price no one expected. The US suddenly had a chance to double its size, but there was a problem. The Constitution didn't clearly state whether a president could buy land like this. Jefferson hesitated, unsure if the move was even legal, yet the offer was too good to refuse. The purchase instantly transformed the nation, stretching its borders across rivers, plains, and future states. It opened pathways for exploration and conflict all at once, shaping decades of expansion. No Nobody realized at the time how profoundly this deal would change everything, and the next moment takes the focus from politics to tragedy on the open ocean. The sinking of the Titanic. The sinking of the Titanic is often reduced to a simple cause, but the disaster was really a chain of small decisions that added up to catastrophe. The ship was promoted as nearly unsinkable, a symbol of luxury and engineering that inspired confidence from everyone who stepped aboard. But warnings about icebergs went ignored as the crew pushed forward at high speed, determined to maintain schedules and prove the ship's capabilities. Lookouts had no binoculars, the night was calm enough to hide dangers, and when the iceberg finally appeared, there was almost no time to react. The collision tore open sections the designers believed were secure, and water flooded the ship faster than anyone expected. Lifeboats launched half empty because panic and confusion overtook planning. As the ship tilted, passengers faced choices between chaos and freezing waters. The tragedy revealed how overconfidence can overshadow caution. It reshaped maritime safety laws, and the world realized progress can hide vulnerabilities. And the next major historical shift showed how far people will go when demanding change becomes unavoidable. French Revolution. The French Revolution exploded from a mix of anger, inequality, and desperation that had been building for years. Ordinary citizens carried the weight of heavy taxes, rising bread prices, and almost no political voice, while the monarchy lived in extraordinary luxury. When economic collapse pushed the country to a breaking point, protests turned into uprisings, and the government struggled to maintain control. As crowds stormed the Bastille, the revolution moved from frustration to action, signaling a dramatic shift in power. New leaders promised equality, but quickly faced their own divisions, and arguments about the future intensified. The Reign of Terror turned those debates into chaos, with executions becoming a daily reality. France swung between hope and fear as each faction tried to shape the nation's identity. The revolution permanently altered politics, showing that people could challenge long-standing systems. It also revealed how quickly idealism can become violence when pressure builds. And the next chapter explores how another giant collapsed, not in months or years, but over centuries. The fall of Rome. The fall of Rome wasn't a single dramatic collapse. It was a long decline shaped by internal strain, shifting alliances, and constant pressure from outside forces. The empire stretched so far that maintaining order became harder each year, and corruption weakened leadership from within. Economic problems deepened as trade routes shifted and armies demanded resources that no longer existed. Enemies tested Rome's borders, pushing harder as the empire struggled to respond. Civil wars drained strength, and loyalty fractured as generals fought for power instead of unity. Cities shrank, infrastructure crumbled, and traditions that once held society together slowly faded. When the final emperor in the West was removed, it symbolized an ending that had really been unfolding for generations. Rome didn't fall in a single event. It unraveled under pressure it could no longer contain. And the next moment reveals a tragedy from modern times that shocked the world in seconds. The Challenger explosion. The Challenger explosion became one of the most heartbreaking disasters in space history because it unfolded live in front of millions of stunned viewers. The shuttle launched on a cold January morning, even though engineers warned that low temperatures could affect critical components. Pressure to maintain schedules pushed the mission forward, and excitement grew as the countdown reached zero. 73 seconds after liftoff, the shuttle broke apart in a violent plume that left audiences speechless. Investigations revealed that a small component called an O-ring had failed under the cold conditions, allowing hot gas to escape and tear the shuttle apart. The tragedy exposed communication breakdowns inside NASA, where concerns weren't properly escalated. It forced the agency to rethink safety procedures, engineering culture, and decision-making at every level. Challenger became a reminder that ambition requires caution, and progress must never outpace protection. And the next major development reshaped how the entire world communicates, learns, and connects: the internet's creation. The creation of the internet started as a military project meant to keep communication alive during emergencies, but it grew into something far more powerful than anyone imagined. Early networks connected only a handful of computers, transmitting simple messages between research centers. As scientists experimented, they developed protocols that allowed machines to speak a common language, laying the foundation for a system that could expand without breaking. Universities joined, tech companies followed, and soon the network grew into a digital world with endless possibilities. Email, websites, and eventually search engines transformed how people found information. The rise of social networks reshaped culture, turning the internet into a place where ideas spread instantly. What began as a technical experiment now influences politics, education, entertainment, and daily life. The modern world exists because that early system kept growing. If you like this video, consider watching this next one, which YouTube thinks you're going to really love.